Get ready for the X-Files here on Buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as...
Well, I promise you the real deal X-Files in this episode. We're going to talk about the alien presence on Earth, the Mars colony, and we'll be joined by Laura Eisenhower, the great-granddaughter of our famous President Dwight D. Eisenhower. So she'll be recounting her experiences as a whistleblower and her personal knowledge, as well as her greater insights into perhaps what is happening on our planet from an alchemical, sort of cosmic, spiritual point of view. So, Laura, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So, to start out, I think, obviously people will be very curious to understand your background, being the great-granddaughter of a president who, was very popular and famous in most of our, actually, not most of our, but let's say many of our lifetimes, our parents' lifetimes. And, coming from that background, at what point did you start to, let's say, interface with the so-called exopolitics of, the extraterrestrial agenda, right? The extraterrestrial presence on Earth. Was this something that you started to recognize as, as a child, or that your mother told you about, or is this something that you came to discover through your own research in later years?
Well, I was, at a very young age, I knew I had a huge mission, and it didn't leave me alone, and I was always processing it. When it came to sort of the ET exopolitics part of it, never anything in my family. I didn't get any information from my family. I did have experiences, though, and I guess you could say I was a bit of a contactee. And there was a lot about preparing me for what was ahead. And it had to do with timelines and stargates and things that relate to the window period that we are in right now, that everybody, is aware of as far as the 2012 part of it, goes.
Right.
And the exopolitics, because I had that sort of contact experience, even though it was almost like a dream, and I wasn't, it wasn't as grounded in reality as I think some people's experiences. But I was standing in the grocery store with my mom, and I saw a Weekly World News article with the rumor about Eisenhower meeting with extraterrestrials. Now, this is a newspaper that is usually, talking about Bat Boy taking over New York City. And but as a child, I saw that, and I was like, that's a true story. And I got really interested in, connecting dots. And it wasn't so much, figuring everything with him out, but he's been a spirit guide since I was a kid. And I shared a room with my sister, and I was always like, are you seeing this? This is our, our great-grandfather. And anyway, he's right there. And lots of psychics have noticed that as well. And so there's been that sort of connection, and it relates to the exopolitics issue because, first of all, there's secrecy surrounding it, and the warning about the military-industrial complex, A
very famous speech, obviously, at the end of his term. And the question being, you're saying you think there actually is an implication because of what was done in the underground aspect, the black ops side of things, the black program, so-called, that had begun since the end of World War II, that most Americans would have known about. For example, when he said, beware the military-industrial complex, they would have thought, Bell helicopter and and the Boeing and these kind of these major military providers, but they would have not have understood the deeper implications of very advanced technologies that were being developed.
Right. So military-industrial extraterrestrial complex was a name that they said in the background, never going public. So we're dealing with things like ET government treaties, a negative ET agenda, and on the more positive side, there's there's a huge number of benevolent species out there. And we tend to think, all grays are bad or all reptilians are bad. And it's a lot for people to even accept the fact that there's even anything called that. But it's important for us to understand the agendas. And so I've always been curious about it. And I've been a dot connector, I guess you could say. How does that relate to this shift time that I was finding out about or feeling into, and how does it relate to certain mythologies and the imbalance of the masculine and feminine, and how nature is being controlled and how we're losing ourselves in a lot of ways to artificial intelligence systems that are playing on these things that are being put in us from chemtrails. People are getting implanted, and when that link is there, then we're talking mind control on a mass level.
What do you mean because of the fact, for example, that we know chemtrails and other products of waste, for example, are putting heavy metals into our bodies, and those heavy metals oftentimes will go towards the brain and can potentially affect us if ELFs, electro-low frequencies, are used, right? They can influence us and mind control us remotely without even us being aware of it, because we don't know that unless you test for it, you don't really realize how much heavy metal is inside of you.
Right, and so they're weaponizing us. They basically are turning our free energy into a weapon against us through the false flags and the distortions in the media and the programmings that we've been inheriting for thousands of years that have taken us further and further away from our divine blueprint and our DNA potential. I mean, we're not functioning at a very high level. We have dormant strands, 12 strands, and we're capable of going beyond that. And so as much as we feel this breathing down our neck, that's also happening, and we're in an incredible place right now. We're in alignment with the galactic plane. All sorts of things are, upgrading us. Nature, the core sun within this Earth is seated as an ascension planet, and it's all about expansion into higher Earth energies and us waking up to the fact that we're multidimensional. It's not all these floating off and, there's people have to understand that there's New Age deceptions. There's, a lot that steers us away from understanding something that we need to know, and so the terminology can turn people off because of how people have defined it, similar to God because of religion.
Sure.
So anyway, the spiritual component, things based on the geophysics of the planet, astrology, exopolitics, and just understanding the multidimensional nature of things and the different races and some of the galactic wars and battles and, really studying galactic history and doing that research and then matching that with my experiences, which, like I said, very at a young age, I was aware of what I'm here to do. But then in 2006, I was recruited to go off planet, and there was a lot of manipulation connected to it. So it wasn't, like a nice invitation done with respect, even though, nobody harmed me or anything. It had a lot to do with, control. And what I came to discover is they can't mind control me, and they know that. So we need to understand what this agenda is about, because it's connected to, ET government treaties and some of the things that were discussed in the 1950s, actually. So it goes on and on.
Yeah, that's what I want to get back to was, you talk about how we're being, the pollutants that we're talking about, the heavy metals that are being used to turn us into, basically, to turn us into metallic, weaponized beings, right, that they can influence. Is this basically an extraterrestrial agenda?
That would be called the negative alien agenda. And 26,000 years ago, from a lot of research, and I've discovered this, more than one person has talked about these sort of technologies. Something called the Nephilim reversal grid was put in place, actually under Stonehenge, infecting and affecting all the ley lines and vortexes, particularly connected to sacred union and the balancing of the masculine and feminine and the union of the masculine and feminine. Mm-hmm. And those technologies were put in place in order to make it very difficult for our DNA to have that sort of potential. And basically it was a rebellion to attempts to heal these negative races. There was attempts with, higher DNA to sort of inspire, some sort of shift, and then these beings don't want to heal, they want control. And they're bent on that, and the only way they can really do that is to target the most important things, our unity consciousness. So all these false flags and all these wars sort of divide us because we have historical resentments based on things that are more based on theater, even though, lives were lost. The stories are altered. There's something going on behind the scenes that set it up that way. And then we're also dealing with these beings that want to control the stargates. And this is the period right now where the natural stargates are opening. And so our DNA is directly connected to the stargates. And as we have the opportunity to expand, a lot of people are going further and further into the traps, which directly impacts the Earth as well, because the Earth responds to us. And so there's absolutely a negative alien agenda as far as who these races are. There's the fallen seraphim, the fallen Elohim, and the reptilian races connected to that. Anunnaki, different factions of the Anunnaki.
Well, so the Nephilim would be separate from the Anunnaki.
There's, the Anunnaki and the Nephilim. It's like the Nephilim are hybrids of the Anunnaki, as far as I'm concerned. And when we think of Anunnaki and we think of archons, they're rulers, they're lower creator gods, and when we learn about some of these names and characters, there's very often two brothers, Osiris and Set, Enki and Enlil. And then the offshoots of all of that. There's different timelines and agendas connected to them. And it's always been about what are they going to do with the human race. But the female lines and the goddess energy, everybody's kind of thrown out, and it's been suppressed for so long.
Well, it's been reversed. How about this Isis thing being a reversal of the divine goddess Isis, the Egypt, right?
I know. Yeah, and that's the whole thing. And the location of that as well. And, and we see also in religion, I'm not going to go there just actually because I don't want, it's too heavy and we don't have enough time, but there's a lot of reversals, the dark mother aspects. Basically when Tiamat exploded, which is now the asteroid belt, that dead space is what they sort of use to feed on. And basically it's the fragmented aspects of this exploded planet and the consciousness of, a portion of the goddess, And then, in that, we're dealing with rituals and things that are feeding on it, and it's based on the fragmentations. And so we have to understand that the same thing happens with us. When we're dealing with traumas and we're fractured, it's very easy for entities to attach. It's very easy for us to be manipulated, and that's the way our culture is set up. And that's why there's so much trauma, because as long as we're fractured and we're broken and wounded, we're very vulnerable. And so this is a time of healing and rehabilitating, and we have to help each other with this, because once we do that, we're strengthening our aura, and we can, call back all the different fragments and aspects and find wholeness again. And we can learn what those things are with tarot decks. There's 78 cards, and just, astrology, we have to understand there's 13 signs. 13 is a very important number, and it's a missing link. It's connected. The 13th Stargate is the one that's going to get us out of here. And when you think about it, why is there not a 13th elevator? Why, it's just,
why is it? Well, the 13th, as I understand it, is more of a transformative.
13th floor, excuse me.
Right. There's the 13 being a transformative number, because 12 is usually like the completion of a cycle or totality. 12 months, 12 disciples around the Christ. 12 houses, and then 13th is usually the transformative number in the process.
Right, and it's actually connected to the mother arc and the core sun within the earth, and and it just goes on. And so, it's just important to understand it. And so it's interesting because, for people who are starting to understand that there is an Illuminati, and of course they're not the true illuminated ones, so actually I should just say the Cabal, 13 families, funny how they take that number.
Right. Now the question is, you mentioned the 13th port, 13th Stargate, being a way for us to get out of here.
Yeah,
in a sense. What does that even mean, though? What does that mean in terms of getting out of, we as humans transcending to a different body, a new body, or is it? What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's kind of, this is where we can just imagine and sort of come up with ideas and envision. The thing is, we're co-creating this reality, and we're dealing with dream warfare, where our imaginations are being siphoned into these stories out there in the news that take all our attention away and distract us from what we're capable of doing. So 12 strands of DNA connect with 12 stargates on Earth. The 13th is like the core sun within the sun. And when that missing link is put back, it's like the veil lifts and we connect with our galactic chakras. We have beyond 7 chakras. And the whole process of the 7 has to do with, the 7 archons, the 7 rulers, but going through sort of that underworld journey, the dark night of the soul, to find the 7 pillars of wisdom and understand who Sophia is, who a lot of people don't even know, connected to Mary Magdalene. And then there's sort of like this graduation, I guess you could say, and it's happening in the sky. The Venus transits, which the Mayans understood, know all about this, of course, and they've been tracking Venus, and Venus draws a perfect pentagram in the sky, and what it's doing, and also a sacred geometry of a kind of a rose figure, what it's doing is the global alchemy part. It is helping to reverse all these, dissension spirals that has been almost creating a planet that's going into digression instead of ascension. And so we have to understand that this is cosmically happening. So when people are like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to ascend? It's like, just chill and like let it flow through you, because it's happening cosmically. It's been drawing a pentagram for thousands of years, and it's turning the inverted upright again, which allows the fifth element to connect to spirit.
That's it. So what you're saying is, what we're looking at, we know from studying Satanism is all about reversal. So I point out, like, why is Madonna satanic? Because first of all, her name is not Madonna. She takes the name of the Madonna, right, who is supposed to be a divine feminine energy, and basically employs herself as a model of that which is like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? So that itself is the inversion of the Madonna energy, right, through her. And then it's most explicitly on display in this most recent Grammys, where she was basically wearing the black Madonna decor, right? The black Madonna was actually Isis originally, and she's surrounded by the Taurus-headed, almost Baphomet type of creatures, all worshiping her, right, dancing around her. So you take something like this, which is full of reversals, and someone like Madonna, you talked about the fracturing of the soul. This is something we've talked about in the Illuminati families, the idea of trauma-based mind control and the victims of that. Are these people oftentimes then themselves victims of this kind of trauma-based mind control, and basically have entities or demons that attach to them and kind of work through them?
That's what it seems to be, and a lot of it is about reptilians going for the reptilian part of their DNA. They are the group that there was an attempted healing on, and so they almost use this group, that were kind of meant to sort of assist the human race, and because if they didn't do the trauma-based mind control, they would be connecting to the part of their DNA that is way beyond this reality. It's Orifim consciousness, that's what it's called, and it's Orifim DNA, and it connects to the Atlantis and Lemuria that were in the higher dimensions 4, 5, and 6, which we used to occupy. When we sank into the lower density, it was about root races and the 12 tribes being seeded. And then we had root races called Lemuria and Atlantis. It was no longer living in these higher worlds, which was like the right and left brain. And when it's leaned too much towards the masculine, and just all these experiments took place and everything sort of backfired, and we sank, a lot of souls feel trapped. A lot of souls are contracted to stay here until this period we're in right now. And, basically the 13 families, I believe, and at least the illuminated ones are the Templars, major infiltrations going on. And the trauma-based mind control, of course, is what allows these possessions to take place. And so this needs to be healed, because we're not dealing with it. So if we get upset and angry at the individual, it's like it's not even them anymore. And so the numbers and the symbols, and the Baphomet energy, which is actually connected to Achamoth and Sophia, that sort of fell into this whole experience because her heart broke, seeing everything that was happening. I mean, there's all sorts of theories.
So is Sophia a bit like the Inanna or the Isis, when Isis descends through the 7 levels mythologically, yes, right, where she has to basically disrobe herself and descend from right to the 7 levels. That's what you're saying essentially happened.
That's the Venus archetype, and it comes through like, it's connected to Sirius, it's connected to the Pleiadians, and the Earth actually is connected to all these different star systems. So it starts off with Sophia, and then the next is Hathor, then Isis, and then Inanna, and then, then there's, Guinevere and Morgana, and then there's Mary Magdalene, and it's all a part of the lineage of the Venus. And the transits are personified through her, and it's the underworld journey. And I actually wrote a book about it. I had no idea that people even had heard of it, and I'm very connected to all this, and I do that, and that's what I did for 20 years of my life. I was out of my body doing all this underworld stuff, and I think a lot of us do it and don't realize, that we're clearing all sorts of energy. We're helping to, rebirth, and we're purifying the mother womb from all these technologies and controls that have turned it into hell, which has created this facade that religion, I mean, I don't want to get into religion, but it's all that. But we're stepping down. So like Tiamat, which exploded, now we're dealing with fragments. And when we look at the asteroids, they're the archetypes. The goddess Athena is an asteroid. Vesta is an asteroid. Juno, which is actually Hera, is an asteroid. And so we're seeing all the characters that show up in mythology, but they're fragments. But they still have stories, and they still have wholeness. But if you put them all back together, and we actually heal, then it's just like We're on a whole other level that takes us right back to the beginning, where Sophia dwells and where the Christ dwells, which is called the Pleroma, which the Gnostics called the Pleroma. But even some of those teachings have been altered. We have to understand that a lot has been altered. There's time travel technology, there's distortions of our history, things are changing. I mean, and it's not about understanding our history anymore. You know, when I have kids in school and it's like, you know, it's not about the history books, it's about understanding time travel technology, you know, and the manipulations that, you know, are taking place behind the scenes. And we have to know this instead of learn something that we don't even know is legit. And plus we're dealing with parallel Earths and different timelines. What is the truth? You know, that leaves us to the question. So the body will help us understand that through the wisdom that it teaches us through pain and symptoms.
So in terms of your story, when you spent 20 years delving into this sort of mixture of out-of-body experiences, research, studying, waking up to a different, almost universal consciousness, you call it, does that then climax with, you said, being recruited in 2006? I mean, is this... How formal was this recruitment that took place?
That's so funny. Yeah, I would say it kind of climaxed there, because when I finally couldn't handle all the controls and everything on me, it was just like, why can't I create anything? I'm a creative being. You know, there's just these things on me and just this weaponry. And I was Andrew Bishago, who was in Project Pegasus, Captain K, who people can Google, who served on Mars and has quite a story, and a few others, the galactic historian Andrew Bartas, have all said I was pre-targeted before birth. And so I've had attention on me, that's all I know. So there was a point though, around the age of 12, I guess before I was going through the change to be, you know, on a whole other level, I guess like teenager to woman, that's when it started. And it was just like I was gone. And I went through the whole cycle of death and just maintained the body. And I went to a clairvoyant institute for 2 years, and they validated all of it. And they said, if it wasn't for your kundalini, you would be dead. And you died, but your kundalini kept you alive for like 20 years. And every day was so difficult to get through. And all I could do was just sort of write and I mean, it's stuff that it's just like, you can't even believe it. It just energetically. And it was weaponry. It was also a person, I talked about this in a radio show the other night, spells, you know, put on me connected to certain information that has never been published, that connects to the story of Eve, that connects to the Philosopher's Stone in an orb that has all the natural ingredients, has nothing to do with a lab, that actually can keep you alive and immortal. And so, you know, document was given to me, and people just, you know, weird stuff would happen where things were given to me connected to a whole other side of it. So it's like the exopolitics and the mythological. And then I was like, okay, we're starting, like something's coming out of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, that journey was unbelievable. And now it's like I'm grounding, and I'm kind of like, okay, it's like I think I'm done, and now I can feel everything rising. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like a whole nother world now.
I'll get back to the Mars question, but first the 2012 issue, because a lot of people have, you know, beef and questions about the dating of this by the Mayans, if this was actually a doorway or a galactic doorway or not, what actually the consequence of 2012 was. A lot of people don't really feel like anything did change, although perhaps in our guts or intuition there was something that shifted. So what's your interpretation of what happened? Something
absolutely shifted, you know, and I think that sometimes no news is good news, you know, particularly when it comes to something like that. I was shuffling cards up into the peak time, which was sometime at 3 in the morning. I've shuffled for like 30 years. I've got calluses, just working energy and global energy. But this was like significant, of course. And it was the worst reading ever. It was like the devil and balance upside down, everything just like across the board, everything. And I was like, wow, you know, we're going through the needle right now, and it's not looking so good. And I knew people all over the planet were, you know, doing ceremonies, and, you know, people just feeling called to do whatever they were called to do, just like I was. All of a sudden, the cards started to change. And I've never seen anything like it, let's just say, around the time that everything peaked. And it was just like, all of it was just good. And it was like the devil, like, was gone, and instead, like the goddess energy, you know, it was just one of those things where your jaw falls to the ground. But sometimes it takes a while for us to catch up with it, you know, and similar with, you know, healing on a physical level. If we change the energy behind the scenes, our body catches up with the shift in our energy, and then the everything that's going on in the physical is different. Same with the planet, how the collective works, how we as light workers do our part. And we have to pat ourselves on the back because we're up against some really heavy forces, but they can only really delay the inevitable. Spirit's going to win no matter what. But if we don't allow it to work through us, and if we don't ground ourselves and connect with the inner core sun of the planet, where's that energy going to go? You know, it goes to them, and they use that free energy, and that is the weapon they have, and that's the belief systems and all the distortions that, you know, we talk about.
You say free energy being what, us, ourselves, are as batteries that we are, basically?
Yeah.
We generate, and how many watts or I don't know how many watts we generate just, you know, by standing here or sitting here.
Right. I mean, we're dream machines, and if there's a glitch, you know, we can create a nightmare or enable all these agendas to succeed. And so we constantly emit energy, and we can tell, you know, like when a relationship is going well, the bliss, you know, the feeling of just elation and euphoria without any drug. And then if there's an argument or somebody said something weird and somebody gets triggered, it's like constriction and pain and we know that it affects our environment. Weird things start to manifest. So if we look at it on a global level, and, you know, mass consciousness is being controlled by, you know, this
fear-based reptilian mind.
Yeah, and the villains that are trying to create a new world order, you know, we're actually helping, you know, by giving it so much of our energy. And so when we call that energy back and we raise our frequency, we dismantle all of that because we can go way higher. They're functioning at a very low level. It's very easy to go above it. We just have to be willing. We have to understand the game and stop calling people crazy who are, you know, doing everything they can to try and wake people up.
Of course, but that's the problem. Is that, you know, oftentimes they try to wake people up from sleep. What do? They hate you for it because
come on, guys.
They're enjoying their sleep, right? You know, leave me alone. So in terms of this, the Mars colony. So again, you've been doing this research, and it was kind of like at the point that you said it was almost like a culmination of this whole process of research. That now, how does this work? Like, you know, what does that mean to be recruited? Who's this? Is this military? Is this, you know, a space command? I mean, how does that recruitment work?
Okay, well, we had a conversation. We talked about the honey trap. That's kind of how I was kind of pulled in. 2006, started, you know, dating somebody. I won't go into like the long story, but I had moved back to DC. This is when I just gave up with all these control energies, so I just, you know, went to this gathering, and this person approached me, and I just thought we were meeting like normal people meet, and there was, you know, affinity, and there was past life memories, and it was like, you know, really big deal. And we started seeing each other, and I was living in DC, and he was going to these secret meetings, and he would come visit me, and he was talking about, you know, what the plan was. They had this plan, and he was talking about Mars, and, you know, I started to get pulled in, and they, you know, seeing emails, you know, connected to it, you know, reading about looking glass technologies and Orion's Cube and all this stuff, and I'm like, whoa. And he's talking about a handler he has, and he's like, you can have a handler. I'm like, I don't want a handler, and I don't want to go to Mars. And so I was like really up against this thing, but the manipulation was the relationship. He's going to take you to Mars, and it's all about your protection. And so I was fed like, you know, stuff that a person might say, hey, that sounds amazing. But I could tell it was infiltrated. I could tell these people were dangerous, and I researched all the names he ever mentioned, and he had abduction experiences, and I believe that they were my lab, and he was dealing with artificial telepathy connected to going to Mars. So these
my lab
people,
being military lab, like,
yeah,
I guess laboratory, but it's basically like someone who's been experimented upon and almost altered since birth by the military. Right,
and the people that he was dealing with are actually connected to MJ12, which are connected. Those are the people with the alien technology, and connected to three-letter organizations, CIA, you know. And when I started to realize this, and I just really, you know, tried to tell him what I was sensing and feeling, and I was having all sorts of crazy dreams that were just giving me all sorts of information that were so lucid about, you know, choosing my mission and being taken up by chains into this ship to go off, and then it's like, make a choice, and I made a choice, and then the planets aligned, and the light filled, and it's like, hey, this is our destiny. It's encoded in our DNA. It's encoded in the planet, you know? We don't need to go to Mars. We don't need to run away, and plus, it's a manipulation, and these are artificial timelines, and they create catastrophes. There's things like HARP, you know, and all sorts of things that can simulate a reality that isn't really a reality. And we have to take our power back so that our energy is the override frequency, and it just kind of trumps it. And so that's what I've been trying to do, and so I decided to expose it. And I think there was a certain point where the agenda wasn't infiltrated and it was actually kind of a good idea. We need to protect the human genome, and I think that was the idea.
Interstellar is all about this. Have you seen this film, Interstellar, that came out last year?
I can't believe I haven't seen it yet.
I mean, the director Nolan is tremendously tapped in, as far as I can tell. He even referred to the term alchemy when he gave out an award
really?
at the Academy Awards last year. He was giving out a science award to one of the innovators for their technological work, and he basically said he's in the tradition of alchemy. I mean, it was very interesting terminology.
So cool.
So the director, from his films, where everything from Inception, which is about being able to implant things through dreams, right? How you can actually influence people through their dream states, and how whether or not this reality itself is a dreamscape, because it's like layers within layers, right? From that to the Dark Knight series, Dark Knight Rises, and whether or not that had influences upon the Sandy Hook event, whether or not that was whether that was on the map.
I mean, that's the thing with implants, is it sending some sort of code? And that's the thing with like MK Ultra. And actually the partner that was going to take me to Mars, he would get phone calls and hear things and then be gone for days and come back. But it's wild, I can't believe I haven't seen that movie yet. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, because obviously the story of Interstellar is all about the idea of life on Earth is doomed, and we have to leave this planet. Now, to me, it's like the galactic human concept is fine. The idea that we are becoming galactic, that we are able to ultimately go into the cosmos and colonize and actually have like a presence galactically. That I'm not opposed to.
Right.
But the idea that life on Earth is doomed and basically has been destroyed, wiped out, pretty much.
Right, and the idea of the elitists hoarding the technologies and keeping it from humanity, while humanity's on Earth, and they create a new world order, and this breakaway civilization is ruling and enslaving the human race. And so this is not about protecting the human genome anymore. And I was picking up on this. I'm like, this is where we start to see shadow government and Project Paperclip, and what it brought, and how there's time travel and there's time travel jumpers, and I could just go on. And so in principle, it's not a bad idea, because that's kind of what we should do. But we need to take care of our people. We need to take care of Mother Earth as we do that. We need to use those technologies to feed those that are hungry, not have these elitists sitting there and pretty much screwing over the human race. And so how can one possibly go along with that? So I'm ready to go to the stars when we do it right. And until then, we got to watch out, and we got to pay attention to this election.
Yeah. Before that, what do you make of what's going on right now? With a lot of talk about these Mars colonists, right? The idea that
I think it's a false flag. I don't think these people are even real, and I think they're just pretending. I think they're trying to get the attention off of people like me and other whistleblowers, Andrew Basiago and Randy Kramers, to get, if we're going to talk about Mars, let's talk about the people that are going to, enter this contest, because there's too much talk about what they're doing and the secrecy and the hidden Mars agenda. And I think it's just a cover. Just like, why was Monica Lewinsky and Clinton such a huge story when, we know there's all sorts of things going on in the background.
Sure.
And there's these things to distract us.
Mm-hmm. So, given that you're starting to basically inch by inch get recruited towards this idea, but it was never a flat out recruitment from a military officer, someone coming forth and telling you, we have a colony, or is this just from the guy that you were?
Well, he was connected to the military. He had these abduction experiences. He was disappearing at night. His family was military. They had implants. It was all wrapped up in this stuff. And the people, the ones connected to MJ12, which was the whole group connected to this. If anybody Googles their names, I'm not going to say it all right now. People can write me if they want to find out more. You'll see that their names are associated with artificial telepathy, MyLabs, and that website wasn't out when I was onto these folks. That came out in 2010. So when we see that whole package, a lot of the people that they work, or bring in, they convince are helping the human race. I mean, he felt like he was doing, good. Sure. And, lots of stuff going on, shifting personalities. There was a feeling of, okay, alters maybe, and I've learned a lot more because of whistleblowers and people coming forward, but that was way later. I didn't have a Project Camelot. I was just like, what is going on? And luckily, my intuition was working, but it's they have the alien technology, and the way they're using it is not to help the human race at all. So we need to wait before we do anything and take care of that issue first.
And did you learn about the Mars colony from these encounters and these discussions, or from later discussions?
It was pretty much immediate when they started talking about it, and everything was through him. But I know all their names. They're a particular name. Their whole group is a particular name, connected, like I said, to MJ12. They're advisors to the CIA. They work with the CIA, and they a lot of them were used because they have remote viewing abilities and stuff like that. And just go back to the.
So in terms of the colony, what was it like? What are we at? What are we talking about here? You're saying that there's actually a human colony that's been on Mars. That's
People need
existing
to-
now, not in the future, now.
Yeah, existing now. And I think, if people really want to find out more, you need to Google people like Captain K. His real name is Randy Kramer, Andrew Basiago. They've been to Mars. Randy served on Mars for 17 years, and his story is similar to Michael Reif, who served for like 17 years. Andrew Basiago teleported there. With me, the target date was 2012, and we were going to travel in what's called ARCs, spelled A-R-C.
Like Noah's Ark.
What?
Like Noah's Ark.
Right. And, like I said, it all kind of sounds like, not a bad idea. But, when you kind of go back to the memories of, the beings that, met with me and said, look through this viewfinder and you're here to, help anchor the organic timeline, basically. Don't let them take you away. And I remember that in the back of my head, and I don't want to go to Mars anyway. It's pretty easy to just sort of start to step back and see what's happening. And the patriotic programming, like I said, leads many to believe that they're doing a good thing. But when you start to see the technologies and what Paperclip did when all the Nazis ended up coming in, we're talking infiltration on a mass scale. And so all the agendas, because this was during Eisenhower administration, and they were really deliberating and really just, he was especially, he set up a special section in the U.S. Marine Corps that signed into legal law that if they couldn't handle these people with the alien technology, they would be under legal authority to disclose everything going on, including everything about Mars. So all you got to do is Google him. He's not a whistleblower. He's under legal authority to tell us everything. And there's 5 colonies there. His name is Captain K, Randy Kramer. 5 colonies. And he said that they're filled with politicians, businessmen, scientists, particular people that they might have picked. But there's a major agenda, and it's a New World Order agenda. And, that might sound scary, but I have no doubts that we've got this, and this is not going to happen.
But the idea of these people being on a colony on Mars is to what? To preserve the human race in case of the extinction of life on Earth, or what is?
I think if it's a breakaway civilization and they've got all these technologies and they're creating sort of a Armageddon scenario with some of the technologies they have, and we're still dealing with things like weather modification and chemtrails, and we are basically turning into robots. Here they are, doing their thing, and we're just on the surface, and either there's extinction or we are, enslaved and locked into an artificial intelligence system.
Virtual reality.
Yeah, and the technologies aren't bad. It's just who's using them and who's in power here, and we can't have criminals running this world. And if we don't do something now in this window period and steer the ship back to where it should be, people are going to look back and wish that they listened to people like you and me.
Mm-hmm. So, go back to your great-grandfather's administration for a second. A lot of these contracts that you've talked about with with the various of these negative alien factions, right? A lot of technology comes from contracts and deals that were made, right? This goes back to treaties, for example. We know that there were lights over the White House in '53. That was tremendous buzzing of the White House, right, and the Capitol in D.C. by one of these species, one of these alien groups, right? Have you just kind of uncovered or discovered what was happening at that point when the first contracts and deals were made, if it was actually under FDR, for example, or if it goes back even earlier when it comes to the U.S. government and the black projects? Well,
we have to understand, things like the Illuminati or the Cabal. It's so different than what we see on the surface. We think, there's this side and this side of a war. And we have to understand that the war is created for a reason. And it's basically, the Hebrews and the Jews were targeted because they carried a particular DNA strand because this is how the 12 tribes were seeded after Atlantis and Lemuria fell. And so there's certain races and lines that come in to help to activate DNA strands in others, which helps us to be in this window period, opening the natural stargates as we advance ourselves on a DNA level. They wanted to wipe out that whole race because they knew that was sort of a missing link. And we all sort of have, kind of missing links. And it goes back to a lot of the ancient history stuff. And it's not like there's a chosen one. or a chosen race. It was the way that the root races were set up, and it was just how, DNA and sharing codes was set up so that we wouldn't ascend too quickly because we screwed up and we sank last time we had all our abilities intact. And so it's not what we see on the surface. And if we understand the true nature of the war, we can get back on track with like what the real point is. And so when it comes to these deals, they remote viewers and a very specific whistleblower, Dan Burish, a whistleblower who is a microbiologist and worked with MJ12. Ron Garner has put out a lot of information about him. He has talked a lot about remote viewers, saying that the gray ETs, were future human selves coming back, asking for help because they're a dying race. After 52,000 years, they can't progress anymore. So what they do is their life cycle is to come back, get some genetic material from us through abductions, and use the technology to sort of create this life cycle. And it's sort of this artificial immortality, but it sort of burns itself out, and so that's why it relies on us. And so when these things were presented, it was different when it was presented with Churchill. He wanted the power. A lot of it was, we'll give you this technology and you'll have power. Sure. And the greed was taking over. When it was Eisenhower, it was a whole different thing, and he didn't have, if people look at the Law of One and what they've written about Eisenhower and what this treaty was about, they basically say he was a congenial, simple person that was not bent on power, and there's all these sort of things that, we're not an Illuminati family. There's nothing, won't even go into it all. But when it comes down to it, it's like, you're hearing about a race, and they're a dying race, and if they're presenting something about we'll only abduct a few and we'll tell you who the names are, and that treaty was broken, what I've researched is that happened in a whole different, that happened in Roosevelt's era, and it actually happened under Churchill's, power. And the reason, the treaty was signed again in 1954, based on all the whistleblower the testimony that I've read, connecting the dots, that when the Nordics had kind of left and they were sort of deliberating about what they were going to do about it, when the Greys showed up, it was a surrender. The whistleblowers called it a surrender. They didn't know what to do, and there's 4 different species that supposedly they saw, and so when you're in that position, we can only imagine. It's another thing when you're collaborating and you're looking at the bigger picture of what this timeline represents and why we ended up digressing into gray form and why we're time traveling back to get that genetic information. So this is the window period where we're making choices. Are we going to advance ourselves and become ascended masters and become, connected to our benevolent star family, or are we going to end up like the Greys? Yes, which exactly.
Is like soulless, so basically, they're apparently they've been drained of their souls.
Right, and so this is kind of the grand central station. Which train are you going to get on? And this is why this is the window period that has been so sort of talked about. In 2012 being sort of the peak of it, and now it's like we have till about 2017. But it's not that if we don't figure it out, we're doomed. At least just commit and devote to being open to this sort of stuff and just have integrity and just live from your heart, and then you're going to be fine. I mean, it's not as scary as we think, but the digression has to do with choosing, technology over soul development and spiritual development, and that's what we saw in Atlantis. So, it's finding that balance. There's nothing wrong with technology, but this is the problem with things like MJ12 and, the Nazi Project Paperclip thing. You're dealing with power-hungry people that don't care about us. And then they got really advanced toys.
Well, you mentioned looking glass technology, for example. Now, what does that mean? I've heard of it as being like basically able to look into the future, right?
It's a quantum access technology. Supposedly, it's like cylinder seals, Sumerian cylinder seals, or anyway, they use that technology to locate me and the partner that was going to take me to Mars in a past life. Because they knew I wasn't just going to fall for anybody. They needed somebody that I had past lives with and I had memories with, so that I'd be like, oh my gosh.
Oh, I see. So in order to recruit you, they
used technology to figure this out.
They had to use the right person, obviously.
Right.
To ensnare you.
And still didn't work. But then, outside of all that, they use it for all these other reasons. They are able to look into the future. And I discovered in the email exchanges, because I was on these threads and I was like trying to figure it all out, that they can't read anything past 2012. And so that's kind of like a similar to...
It was like a singularity point. And that's I think Bielek had mentioned that, how when they were doing time travel stuff, there was like something about 2012 that shifted the timelines.
Right, and that's kind of when we sort of decide, and that's why there's mass manipulation, because they want to steer us in a certain direction, and we don't need to go in that direction. And so even the Aztec calendar, the fifth world, there's no real story connected to it. It's like, okay, it's kind of like create your own adventure, and I just encourage people, like, write, take the pen and write your future. This is a powerful time. We're extremely powerful and creative right now, and because they couldn't read this time, it means the presence of source is just really just aligned with the planet. As the core sun's getting activated, all this stuff is going on and it's affecting us. We have an internal sun. We have DNA that's being affected by all of this. So we just have to we have to be present and allow ourselves to be shifted, and let that other world, do whatever. We need to starve it, So if it's going to do whatever, let it face, let them, get lost in their own dynamics.
There's like the whole
leave us away, leave us out of it.
There's a Native American expression that says that we always have two wolves inside of us, right?
Yeah,
it's
I love
the
that
good
one.
and the evil. Which one do you choose to feed?
Exactly. That's perfect, like, for right now to think about that exact quote. It's like, that's the times we're in, and we can think of the gray or the ascended master or being in the crystal city, like, and there's underground cities. So if we did get driven underground, we don't have to digress. We can find all sorts of things down there that, and it depends on our frequency and vibration, our intention.
Right, exactly. I mean, presumably that's the whole point, that there have been underground cities for thousands of years on this planet. What they call Shambhala or Agartha, right? Civilizations living down there. So there's no end to life on this earth. It will continue on in some form. The other question I had was the Orion's Cube you mentioned.
I don't know enough about that to even talk about it.
Really?
Yeah.
But do you have any idea like what it even refers to?
I mean, I think it's all connected to this sort of, the big deal with the time travel stuff is always, what is humanity going to do if they do this? And, projecting into the future and trying to get an idea, strategizing like how to, put us, in a certain place. Like, for example, if we're about to take a huge leap in consciousness, that's usually when a false flag or an event happens in the news. I think it's it's one of those devices that is connected to the future, the past. It's very connected to the looking glass in a certain way. I've done a little bit of research it a long time ago. The Yellow Book comes up and all sorts of stuff, and it's an alien technology, and and it's just basically about how it's manipulation of timelines, and everybody wanting to play God, and that's great. Play it in your own life, in your own personal universe. These technologies. Use them to bring balance back. Feed the people. Take care of the people.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know enough about it but
the cube resonates certainly as something that sort of it sort of, how do you say, locks people into timelines, right? Or a sense of the cube itself locks us into a worldview, right? With those straight edges, as opposed to a sphere, which is more infinite. So it's interesting that it's called the Orion's Cube, because that would seem to play upon the timelines. But a question...
Yeah, that's a great observation about,
A question about the timelines, people would say, well, if they have this technology of looking glass, why couldn't they have seen that you weren't going to choose to go to Mars? Why can't they, why couldn't they have shifted the past?
Because I'm a time traveler, but I don't need the technology, and so I mess with them. And I've had people come and see me in times of Atlantis negotiating with me about things that would happen here. When I dream, all sorts of things take place, and I'm constantly strategizing and okay, and it never ends.
It seems that way. I mean, it seems that is more in line with what Einstein said about time being past, present, and future being one. So if you think about that, really, whenever, as soon as you make an influence or you make a choice that changes a timeline, right, what may be a timeline right now that we're on, it's immediately impacting all your past lives as well as your future lives.
Yeah, exactly.
So it makes it very tricky, I think, to, people would say, oh, it's just easy to go and change the past, and it's not that simple, because every time you're making an adjustment, everything else adjusts with it.
Yeah, and we have to realize too, it's just like, there's strategy, and there's things that, they're not very good at, but some things they're really, really good at. So we're advanced on levels that they can't keep up with, particularly when we remember how we're so beyond this lower density. And we've been preparing for this for 26,000 years, just like they have, with their New World Order. We've been preparing to help the human race ascend during this time. A lot of people are falling asleep on the job because we are born with amnesia, and there's a lot of targeting. Kids are put on medication or Ritalin, when they're crystal kids and indigo kids, and the school system's dangerous like that. But we're always going to be ahead of the game, because spirit, you can't fool it, and this is why these technologies can't see past a certain point, and this is why, at the end of the day, consciousness is going to be able to handle, these mind control attacks and these, things that are coming through our phone. It's like, awareness and consciousness and just being willing to understand is going to, raise us above it, and it's amazing how much we can dismantle the machine. And so, and when I was a little kid, I was just like, thinking about the state of the world, having a great idea of what's really happening, and just being like, I know exactly what to do to get us out of this mess. And that's all I heard so much in my life. And then the other thing was, so much walking through gateways of hell, different dimensions that are just, having to face, really dark stuff. And just this little voice, you're almost done, you're almost done. It's just like, it's work, it's like, we're on incredible missions and we know what we're doing. That we came in here knowing what we're doing. So, we just have to let it unfold and just understand the game and just, and yeah.
Well, that's what it seems to me is a big aspect of what we're talking about in terms of feeding the good, the higher soul of ourselves, is to have faith in a higher power, have faith that this is all, in a sense, being worked out by a much higher consciousness than our own, and the fact that we don't have to, force. We can go with that will, right? With that divine will, and exactly with the flow, the force. And you think about Star Wars. I mean, it's very interesting how that story was set around this whole idea of the force, that you can either give into your ego and try to control it, and when you control it, guess what? You end up like Darth Vader, who's what? He's a robot, right? He becomes more and more of a cyborg because it's eaten away at his humanity and his flesh and everything. Or you can be more in tune with positive aspect of the flow of not being ego-driven, and then you can be like Luke Skywalker and not have to need the computer to tell him when to fire at the Death Star, but he follows his intuition, right? So there's so many interesting messages that come through in that story, and I think that apply to what we're talking about here as to what's going on, where we're going at this point in time.
Totally, and there's so much magic, and think of all the the stories and legends and myths that people just really don't take seriously. It's like, are you kidding me? And we have to understand too, it's like the battle of light and dark, we have to understand that it's not about the battle of light and dark, anymore, maybe in the higher dimensions, because we all have light and dark. We have to embrace our light and dark, and this is the alchemy part. The light is the seed and the darkness is the soil, and the darkness is like fertile in its creativity. It's like where things birth from, and we've lost connection to it, and we're afraid of our darkness, and that's why we give our power away, and they teach us to fear our darkness. But if we can understand that the light and dark work together just like day and night, and just polarities can dance with each other instead of have power struggles, and we do that within, that's when we send out that free energy and those ripples, instead of have it siphoned away because we're believing in all the propaganda and all the all the stuff that is false teachings.
The stage where they, just like we watch musicals or we watch Madonna performing at the Grammys, that's very much the way that they see the world for them. It's a magic show which they can manipulate because they've thought about it, they've planned, they've prepared, and then once they put it out there on the screen, we start to believe that's reality.
I know, and it's amazing. And then people, they believe it so much that they've lost their connection to the mystical and
their own mystical, in a sense, their own magical abilities.
Totally.
Every person being a magical being in waiting, in a sense. They haven't necessarily fostered that aspect of themselves or recognized that aspect of themselves, and yet they have magical powers.
Right. I mean, what archetypes, exist in the artificial matrix except for all those reversals we talked about? We're wizards, we're alchemists, we're priestesses, we're all these things, we're all these things. We all have that. And when you said that, it was like, didn't Frank Zappa have a really cool quote about just the way it's all set up? But we need to return to that, and that's the mythological part of what I attempt to do, and it's like, okay, where does it fall into place, so that we can knock out, the characters that are sucking our souls. It's just, it's out of a movie. And what happens? Sacred union, happily ever after, but it's always about battling that villain, and the kingdom almost gets destroyed. And the thing is, there's the drones, and there's the soulless beings, and, people, you don't want that. And, and so because I put out a lot of weird information, or at least to people, it's often weird, I do session work, and I help people process this stuff, and assimilate it and understand, what's going on inside of them energetically, so that they can handle the information and also feel empowered, because there's a lot to look forward to, but we have to bust the imposter. Who wants to be in a relationship with somebody cheating? Who wants to be lied to? So this isn't fear-based. This is like, we're going to bust the imposter, and then we get ourselves back. This is actually exciting. So let's celebrate and stop acting like it's such a problem.
Right. Where can people find more of your work and what you're about, what you're doing now? Obviously, because you're hosting a show as well.
I've taken a break from the show, but my website is cosmicgaiasophia.com. And you can find me on Facebook. There's a lot of events coming this year, and everything about my session work you'll find on my website, and pretty much everything I do is there. So
you do sessions as well?
Yes, I do astrology and tarot and chakra readings, and I do clairvoyant readings too, and relationship readings, and different charts. And so I have all sorts of things listed on my site, and I have a sliding scale. I work with your budget. If you're in really desperate need, and and the timing is right, I'll help you without, the need for that donation. I mean, I'm really just, the biggest deal is us becoming like a global family and joining up, because the power of what we can do together is huge. And so that's always in my heart, and that's the number one intention. And I think, people have to, not, it's hard to be trusting, and so I also am willing, to answer any question, and I'm pretty transparent. So I do consultations, and, I just want to help people. But if you're going to cuss at me, and if you're going to, put me, and if you're going to be, a total, I won't say the word, it's going to be kind of difficult.
As you said, it's about raising that, which is the positive vibration within us, and hopefully getting us to that and connecting ourselves as a totality, as a human race again, right? Regardless of these root races. That's one last thing I wanted to ask you about. What does that mean? Are we actually all, are our root races each from different star systems? Or what is our, obviously there's a common origin, but there also does seem to be some difference between us.
Well, you can have a soul incarnating into a root race that is from another star system. The root race has to do with the 12, the 12 tribes. And then it was different later when it had to do with the Ark of the Covenant and a whole nother seeding of the angelic humans connected to the indigo and crystal kids that were needing to come in because the planet was really in trouble. And it all connects to these blueprints. We're all that. And we're from all over, we're not just, native Earth beings. A lot of people feel trapped. They have memories of way before this particular planetary body. This is the second planet. This is the second creation. And Gaia actually was created specifically to help us in our soul development, because we fell and we, ended up losing ourselves. And so a lot of different races and founder races, have done so much to try and succeed in, I guess you could call it a human experiment, because I don't like the word experiment, but with all the fallen angelics and all the negative beings and all the different things that have been in opposition to it, the human race is caught in the middle. So, but it's empowering because we get to decide what we're going to do, and we don't have to choose sides. We can just understand that we're made of all of it, all these creative forces. So make them get along within you, and send out a happily ever after, and let them look down at that energy and adjust to it. We're really powerful. We can change what these lower creator gods are doing by changing ourselves.
That's a good message to leave with.
Cool.
Thank you so much for joining us and talking with us and speaking your truth, because obviously it's a lot to convey, and it might be over people's heads, but at the same time, I think at an intuitive level, hopefully people are able to understand what you're getting at and where you're coming from, because obviously it comes from a lot of years of research, experience, direct insight that you can't really convey in just an hour.
Well, thank you so much. I've just really enjoyed being here. Thank you for what you're doing And I just really appreciate it. And everybody, thanks for listening. And I just, like I said, I'm available. I'll answer questions, and there's a lot, of course, negative information and rumors that go around. And so if you're concerned about that with me, send me an email.
Direct,
and we'll talk.
So cosmicgaiasophia.com, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you so much.
All right, there you have it, folks. Another fascinating interview and insights into the much grander reality that exists beyond our five senses. I can't tell you enough how important each and every one of you are, because, as I said, we are each magical beings, and each one of you is the revolution that is to come. This is Sean Stone signing off.